We would like to introduce Dr. Brian King. Dr. King is the director of the FDA Center for Tobacco Products since July 2022. Dr. King has worked for nearly 2 decades to inform tobacco control policy. Prior to joining the FDA, he served as Deputy Director for Research Translation in CDC's Office on Smoking and Health, and more recently as the Executive Director of CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report Series, which you all saw surely during COVID. And he has authored more than 200 scientific journals related to tobacco prevention and control, and served as senior associate editor for multiple U.S. Surgeon General reports. I can go on and on. His full bio is on our website, on our conference website. So please go and see all the amazing things he's done. But here he is. Welcome, Dr. King. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, wonderful. Brian. Thank you, Dorian, Meredith, and the whole team. Pleasure to be here today. And I will say that we need to take a page out of your book. Like, we should start every conference with Sister Sledge. Like, I am totally So a pleasure to be here, everyone. And I don't plan to bore you too much with PowerPoint, but I am going to screen share and go over a few slides and then hopefully open it up after about 15 minutes or so for some Q&A, which I always find is most useful in these situations. So everything Dorian said was true. Definitely don't be fooled by the youthful glow. I've been in tobacco control for now nearly 20 years and was at the forefront of a lot of the initial clarion calls around e-cigarettes back in 2012, 2013, when it was only 2-3% among kids, and then to see where it got in more recent years. We've certainly got our work cut out for us, but I appreciate all the efforts of all the folks in the room today. And today I did want to just go over what FDA is doing in this space to prevent youth tobacco product use more generally, particularly e-cigarettes, which have been the most commonly used product among U.S. youth since 2014. So without further ado, here's just a general overview. I just want to give folks a flavor for the Center for Tobacco Products, which, as Dorian noted, I am the director of. I'm about 15 months into my role and have hit the ground running. Then I want to focus on some of the patterns in youth e-cigarette use, which I'm sure you'll hear about throughout the day, but just to set the stage for where we're at as a broader country. And then I want to give some programmatic updates from FDA's Center for Tobacco Products in terms of things we've got in the hopper and where we're going and what our priorities are. And importantly, I also want to end with how can you help? I think this is a really critical component. We're in this together. And FDA obviously has a very clear role around regulation of tobacco products, including e-cigarettes. But we can't do it without the important support of folks across the country at the state, national, and local level. So I do want to just prime everyone in terms of regulation of tobacco products, including e-cigarettes in this country. FDA actually got the authority back in 2009 with the Tobacco Control Act. So President Obama signed it at that time, and it gave us regulatory authority over the manufacturing, marketing, and sale of tobacco products. And then it wasn't until 2016 where we had to go through different processes to get other products under our jurisdiction. And so we did that for e-cigarettes in 2016. And our initial authority at that time was we were able to regulate products containing nicotine that came from the tobacco plant. And so most nicotine at that time came from the tobacco plant. But then we saw the industry try to start to circumvent that and find loopholes around the law. And so they started to develop nicotine in labs. And that's what we call synthetic nicotine, or non-tobacco nicotine is a more general term. And so just last year, Congress closed that loophole. And now the FDA has the authority to regulate tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, regardless of where the nicotine comes from. So whether it's from the tobacco plant or whether it's from a lab. And that's a really important part of our authority. And of course, we do know that there are implications for nicotine, not just because it's highly addictive, but e-cigarettes, the vast majority include nicotine, and it can harm the developing adolescent brain, which we, of course, know continue to develop until age 25 or 26. So there's a really strong importance of prevention. And that's part of CTP's vision and our mission. And I will say I frequently get asked, are we a regulatory public health agency or a public health regulatory agency? And my answer is the latter. Public health is front and center. It's in everything that we do. Congress has afforded us an appropriate for the protection of public health standard. And that said, we're really focused on making that occur, and then also being mindful of, importantly, that youth prevention angle. And so you can see that that's mentioned not only in our vision, but also in our mission around the importance of especially engaging with youth and young adults to prevent initiation and use. That said, why is it important? Well, we know when we look at conventional cigarettes that the vast majority start before the age of 18, about 90%, and then nearly 99% by the age of 26. And we tend to see similar patterns for other tobacco products as well. The data are stronger on cigarettes because they've been around longer, but we generally see these patterns. And so it really reinforces that importance of prevention, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Benjamin Franklin said 100 years ago, many hundred years ago, and it still holds true, that it's really critical that we stop things from happening in the first place. And that's why the FDA very much reinforces the importance of prevention for tobacco products among kids, and that is and will continue to be a strong component of our portfolio. That said, we've been on a bit of a roller coaster in terms of tobacco product use in this country, particularly e-cigarettes. So that's going to be that red line that you see here. And we did have some changes in methods, but you can see from the National Youth Tobacco Survey that use started to increase beginning in 2012 and 2013, and we peaked in 2019 when we had over 5 million kids in this country who are currently using e-cigarettes, which is highly problematic. Since that time, we've made considerable progress. We're now less than half that is, but I do encourage folks to not be desensitized by the fact that it was so high before. We've still got more work to do, even though we've brought down those prevalence rates and the number of kids. There's still more work to do, and we're committed to getting it even lower. And as you can see for other products, it's hovering around 1 or 2%. And so e-cigarettes remain that most commonly used product. And I also want to reinforce that it's not just the current use. We also see some differences in frequency. About 1 in 4 kids who are using e-cigarettes are using them frequently, which of course is a concern when you're using a product every day. That shows signs of dependency and addiction. We have seen increases in dependence around e-cigarettes among kids in recent years. That's the result of multiple factors, but one of the most notable is nicotine salts, in that those were introduced beginning with Juul back in 2015. And now many products have started to use that same technology, and it allows the nicotine to absorb into the bloodstream and cross that blood-brain barrier more quickly. What does that mean? Higher risk of dependency and addiction. So even if we do see declines among kids, it's important to remember that the kids who are using them more frequently, which is a cause for concern. We also see a lot of concurrent tobacco product use with kids using multiple products. And again, that frequent use, 4 in 10 have used an e-cigarette 20 of the last 30 days. So we still got more work to do. But I do want to highlight that we have made some progress, but we can't rest on our laurels, and we got to continue to drive down those rates. Well, we're also complicated by the fact that the landscape is really dynamic. It continues to change. A lot of risk factors, work in years and decades. In tobacco control, we work in days and weeks, and you can see marked shifts in the landscape. And here's just an example of where we're at in terms of e-cigarette products. These are data from our colleagues at the International Tobacco Control Survey, showing the increased trends. And you can see an example here with Elf Bar in green, just recently appeared on the surveillance systems last summer and fall. And ultimately, there's that lag between when we collect the data and when we get it to take action. And so it's critically important that we're as nimble as possible to get rapid response surveillance so that we can identify these emerging brands and take action expeditiously. So speaking of taking action, what does FDA do? Well, these are the 4 key areas where we've got things in the hopper that I did want to highlight for you all. The first, although they don't relate to e-cigarettes, I think it's important for this group to know that there's several product standards that are in the queue in terms of actions that FDA will be taken. One is prohibiting menthol in cigarettes, and the other is prohibiting all flavors in cigars. And these have been in the works for many years, and they just went to the White House the week before last. So are they in the final final stages, and these would have a profound impact in terms of youth prevention. And I will say that right now we're focusing on combustibles because we know that's responsible for the overwhelming burden of death and disease from tobacco, but there's still opportunity in the future to develop similar product standards for a variety of things related to e-cigarettes. And so we ultimately follow the science, and that's why it's important that we have that evidence, we build the evidence base, and then can take action. And so without a product standard, we evaluate e-cigarettes on an application-specific basis, but the bottom line is we're priming the pump. These are the first product standards out of the agency, and we're hopeful that there will be more to come as we continue to develop our strategic plan for the next 5 years. But it's not the only thing in the queue. We also have a nicotine product standard that we intend to propose. The other two are being finalized. And this one focuses on combusted products, cigarettes and certain other combusted products. But I will note that we always have public comment periods with these types of rules. And, one thing to consider is what products should be included in any type of product standard like this, where you're capping nicotine to make it minimally addictive, which is really important from a prevention lens. And so I encourage folks to continue to follow this issue. And once we do propose the rule, be prepared to provide those comments with regard to the various scope of the rule. So now let's move to application review. So as I noted, if we don't have a product standard, then we have to review on an application-specific basis. And so there's a variety of pathways that you can apply to FDA to sell their products, but the bottom line is unless your product was around before 2007, you got to submit an application to us. And there was no e-cigarette around before that. So every e-cigarette company has to submit those applications. You can do it through a variety of ways, but the most commonly used is the pre-market tobacco product application, or PMTA. And as a part of that process, the companies have to submit the information, and we review all the science from a diverse array of individuals. It can be chemists and toxicologists, microbiologists, engineering, even social scientists. And we look at all that evidence to make a determination around, is that e-cigarette appropriate for the protection of public health? And in order to do that, we got to weigh the risks, which in most cases is kids using these products, versus the benefits, which is an adult smoker who may use that product to transition completely. That said, after reviewing the science, we have made determinations on 99% of the applications. There's 26 million e-cigarette products out there in applications, so certainly a lot of work, but the good news is we're almost to the end, and we've authorized 23 e-cigarettes products and devices to date, and those are the ones that were able to meet that public health standard. Importantly, none of those are flavored. We do not have a de facto policy against authorizing a flavored, but it's important to note that the vast majority of kids who are using e-cigarettes are using flavored varieties, about 80 to 90%. And so it's a high bar to overcome. And we've been very clear to the public and applicants that we're looking for that differential impact of flavors. And so unless you can document that that flavor is absolutely needed to help an adult smoker transition completely, then it's not going to be authorized. And we have set the stage for that with flavored e-cigarettes, and most recently also applied a similar standard to menthol e-cigarettes. But in addition to the applications, we also have compliance and enforcement. It's an important part of our authorities at FDA. And so as folks submit applications, we authorize or don't authorize based on the science, but we also have the ability to take enforcement action for e-cigarettes that are on the market illegally. And so outside of those 23 e-cigarettes that have been authorized, unless you have that authorization, you are on the market illegal and at risk of enforcement action, aside from a few very specific circumstances where we would not take action. That said, we assume admirable intent. We want to train folks, including all those we regulate, including retailers and manufacturers, on how to comply with the law. We continue to inspect and do surveillance on a routine basis. We have arrangements with all of the states to ensure this happens, particularly brick and mortar institutes, but we also are able to do online surveillance. And then we also can take enforcement actions. And the people we can take enforcement actions are a variety of folks. So it's manufacturers, it's importers, distributors, retailers, and that's really important for us because we want to make sure we address the entire supply chain, from when the products are made all the way through the point of sale at the retail level. And we got a lot of tools that we can use. And I will say that we've recently ramped up all of our efforts in this space. Within the past year alone, we've issued our first injunctions against e-cigarette manufacturers in coordination with the Department of Justice, also our first civil money penalties against e-cigarette manufacturers, and more recently, the first civil money penalties against retailers for the maximum amount allowed under the statute. So I will say more to come on this front, but we have initiated an escalated series of action, and we'll continue to include those as part of our routine portfolio. We typically start with a warning letter to make sure people know that what the issue is, and we give them time to correct it. And if they don't, then we can escalate from there. And that's what we've done within the past year with regard to civil money penalties and other actions. But that's not it. We've had a variety of, warning letters, as I noted. We're primarily focusing on those products that are kid appealing, so flavored, disposable e-cigarettes. We've had several nationwide blitzes over the summer focused at retailers and distributors. And we're also focusing on imports as well, issuing import alerts to prevent the products from entering the country, given that we know a variety of the disposable products are being manufactured in China and elsewhere. And so again, it's that comprehensive approach that's important for us to take. We're also mindful, too, that there's a lot of very egregious products out there as well. We try to have the greatest impact on public health, so we focus on those high market share products. But we also have recently issued warning letters for some of these very egregious ones, like highlighters, SpongeBob SquarePants, Mario, you name it. And I've said publicly many times that it's a very hard sell for me to suggest that an adult smoker needs their e-cigarette to look like SpongeBob SquarePants in order for them to quit completely and transition to an e-cigarette. These products are flagrantly targeted towards kids, and we've continued to take action to get these off of the market. So I want to close out before we open it up to Q&A on public education, which is a key part of FDA's portfolio. In addition to everything else, we do have a responsibility as well to educate the public on the risks of tobacco products, particularly when it comes to kids. We've done that with real cost for many years. We started with regular cigarettes back in the early days and have since evolved over time to also include e-cigarettes as those increased in appeal among kids. This is a digital campaign, and we continue to release new ads on a routine basis. We also have focused on some health equity related implication ads as well. Last summer, we had the Next Legends campaign, which was focused on e-cigarettes among American Indian Alaska Natives. That said, as long as I am around, we will continue that key prevention lens to help prevent kids from using these products. The data show that these are effective, and we use that data-driven approach to inform what messages are going to be most impactful among youth, and also importantly evaluate to make sure we have that data continue to moving forward. We're also ramping up our resources as well. We recently released a cadre of new vaping prevention resources, and I encourage you to visit this website. There's a lot of great fact sheets and also great information for teachers and students and parents to help complement the ongoing messaging from a variety of partners, including the great resources from the folks at PAVe. So now I'll just close, how can you help? I get this question a lot. I think it's very easy to criticize the government, and, sometimes it's justifiable. And so folks, obviously have a lot of critiques, but I do want to encourage folks to participate and help us out so that we can best be informed to do our job. There's a lot of things you can do. One is participate in rulemaking. Like I said, we had these recent opportunities around the product standards. There'll be more opportunities for public meetings and workshops and other entities. So strongly encourage you to have your voice heard and to participate. You can also report violations and adverse experiences. This is really important. So if you're seeing a certain product, a certain issue that's happening on the ground at the state and local level, I strongly encourage you to submit that information. We've got a team of folks that then take that. We can inform subsequent actions, including enforcement and compliance, but it's really good to have that pulse from folks at the state and local level to inform those actions. We also have a variety of opportunities for you to maximize our education efforts. We've got a lot of free print material and content on social media, and then also reinforce collecting data to inform our efforts. It takes a village, and it's important that we do have that local and state data, and that if you have any information to share with us to inform any potential emerging issues or areas where you think we should take action, we strongly encourage you to collect information and provide it through the mechanisms available. So with that, I will just close with some contact information, and also encourage you to go on our social media. We got a lot of great resources again. And if you haven't noticed, we've really ramped up our communication strategy to make sure that we're being clear about what we're communicating, when we're communicating it, and who we are communicating it to. And with that, I'll turn it over to Meredith, who I believe is going to moderate some Q&A over the next 20 minutes or so.
Brian, we're really grateful to have you and for giving such a great overview. And as you know, we parents, our Parents Against Vaping, and all of our volunteers, we do not have any problem making our voices heard. And in fact, I just want to say that we really appreciate your willingness to hear the voices, particularly of those who are whose lives have been upended by the youth vaping emergency. So thank you. I think the first question we want to ask, you referenced the figures and that there has been, thankfully, a drop in youth use. Our understanding is that the last 2 years are difficult to compare to prior years because of COVID. Could you give us a time frame on the 2023 NYTS National Youth Tobacco Survey figures? Obviously, we know, or we assume, that you and many others already know what the numbers look like, and the rest of us eagerly await them to see where we are.
Yeah. So the bottom line is very soon. So we release it every fall. We're on track to do that. And so I would say stay tuned for release of those data. As you appropriately note, I think we've kind of gotten out of the asterisk years, right? That pandemic fog is lifted. And I think it's very important for us to see what's happening now that kids are going back to school, because we know social sources were really important. So when kids were not in school, we did see some dips that I think was multifactorial, but particularly related to that. And so we're working like gangbusters to get those data out. As we've done in the past, we'll have an MMWR, and that is very imminent. And I encourage folks to be on the lookout and also leverage those data to be mindful. I think that, when we do have any types of gains, it's important to celebrate those. And if we don't have gains, it's important to sound the alarm, to push the accelerator and continue to move forward. And so stay tuned, and we're hopeful to get those out in the coming weeks.
Thanks. I think also your point about don't become desensitized when the numbers go down. Obviously, there is no safe tobacco product for a child. And so one child is one child too many. So I appreciate it.
No, completely agree with you, Meredith. And I think it's, particularly in the context of like that 2019 number, right? Like nearly 30% of kids. And so you have to contextualize that, right? Especially when you see where the other products are. And so, even though we've made some good progress over the past 2 years, I don't want folks to rest on laurels or become recalcitrant. We've still got more work to do. And we know how low it can go after looking at the other products. And that's where e-cigarettes should be.
Right. And of course, the CDC announced this summer that 10% of young adults ages 18 to 24 are using these products. So part of that is that a lot of kids have aged out. We also want to ask about the long delayed, this is nothing you haven't heard before, PMTA process. And so will FDA have completed finally its review of all the millions of PMTA applications that you received, let's say by, I don't know, Brian, 11:59 p.m., December 31st, 2023.
Yeah, so I said, as I've said publicly before, we're committed to getting to 100% by the AP reporting deadline. We've made great progress on that front. We're due out with a quarterly report imminently this week, and we've already on track nearly 70%. We were ahead of the mark during the last reporting. I will say that there's some complexities that are important for folks to consider in terms of it's not as easy as just review the applications and turn them over. One of those is litigation. And so if we are litigated against and there's an adverse decision, we then have to make sure that whatever factors were raised in that litigation are considered in any subsequent decision making for applications. And so what we don't want to do is just proceed forward and issue a decision that then is going to be subject to similar aspects from a previous court. The good news is we've had a lot of wins in various circuits, particularly around flavored e-cigarettes. We've won in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 7th, 9th, and DC circuits. We just had a really awesome win last week with Logic. The first menthol decision was upheld by the 3rd Circuit, but we've also lost some, and that's important to remember. And so the Fontum decision is one to consider. And so what we don't want to do is plow forward in a way FDA that could potentially jeopardize subsequent decisions. And so that's one factor. And then also amendments. And so companies do have the ability to submit amendments. And so we have to be mindful if they provide us information that could change the decision, we have to consider that. And so a lot of moving parts, but the bottom line is we're 99% through. We're almost there. We're continuing to see the percentage uptick on the quarterly reports. And I'm committed to getting this done ASAP and by the reporting deadline by the end of the year.
And we
That's
appreciate
great.
that. And I just want to add one last thing that when you say that you're committed to that by the end of the year, speaking of litigation, which is one of the industry's delay tactics, does that include a decision on Juul's menthol and tobacco PMTAs, which had been put aside in an agreement by FDA and Juul when there was litigation? So does that commitment include the decisions on Juul?
So the Juul decision is already incorporated in the percentage around AAP, so that won't change the percentage. I will say that there was scientific issues that we're still considering, and the goal is to get it out as soon as possible. But again, I can't reinforce enough that we can't rush the process. If there are legal implications that in the long term could be more problematic, we have to first consider those. And so the commitment is to get it done, but we got to get it done right. And, you know, we can have a wrench thrown in our wheel at any given week, you know, with different decisions. And so the goal is to get it out ASAP. Folks know where I sit on this. I'm a scientist, and the science has to be right. And so you can rest assured that I'm committed to doing it as expeditiously as possible. But we got to remember all those moving parts. But I can tell you it's a priority. We're working on it, and we're committed to getting all of these done as soon as possible.
Right. And we know you are, and we know that, you know, it's interesting. The industry will accept any wins, but the moment something is dinged, they turn to the courts. So our next question is, once you have completed this PMTA process, do you have a timeline for removing and clearing the market of all unauthorized products? And how quickly do you think that can be done? I mean, we know enforcement has always been a challenge, especially now. So do you think the enforcement, once these decisions will be made, you know, and cleared off, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I'm hopeful that once we get through the initial bolus of applications, that we can get back to an actual pre-market paradigm, which would be 180 statutory, you know, day deadline. You know, that's obviously the goal. I'm hopeful that we will be able to shift. We're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we were inundated with a massive amount of applications and under-resourced to be able to process them in the time allotted, including the recent million that came for synthetic. I am pleased to report we just hit the 100% mark for review of those this past week. And so we're making good progress, but I also can't reinforce enough the importance that we have to do the due diligence and scientific review, because the last thing we want is to lose in court, and that has really profound implications. So all that said, on the enforcement compliance front, you know, we can't be everywhere at every time. And so we've got to prioritize. And right now our focus is on those high market share products that kids are using to take action. We do see market shifts as a result of actions. And so I wouldn't, you know, diminish some of these initial actions that we've taken, including the injunctions and civil money penalties, but there's more to come. And we have to prioritize, because with 26 million products out on the landscape, the last thing we want is millions and millions of lawsuits, because FDA does not have independent litigation authority. And so I rely on the Department of Justice and others to defend us. And so we have to pick and choose where those resources are going to be best maximized. That said, we're very strategic about our approach, and we're committed to continuing to escalate in enforcement compliance. And I'm hopeful that we're going to see those returns in terms of impact in the coming year and moving forward.
Meredith?
Yeah, you know, one of the, and we are encouraged, as you said, by FDA's escalation in enforcement, but it's also, and certainly for parents whose kids are addicted to these products. We actually got a question that we'll reply to privately later that was for you from a public health researcher and scientist talking about his own child's addiction to Elf Bar. And of course, Elf Bar, as FDA has said, is the most popular product among kids. When these products are coming from China and therefore are completely unregulated and are not under your jurisdiction, presumably, you know, what how do you address that? I mean, in China, flavored e-cigarettes can't be sold. And so it seems like so many of those companies, Elf Bar and Miley and others, have exploited our own loopholes or regulatory delays. So how can FDA get control of the products that you're not getting applications for, and you won't get applications for?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right that, we don't have jurisdiction until they hit our borders. And so I think that's one, misperception, is that, we can parade across the globe and be taking action against foreign entities. We certainly can't do that. But one thing we can do is address at the border. And I think, another misperception folks have, that this is solely FDA's space. The realities are that there are myriad federal entities in the enforcement and compliance kitchen. And FDA frequently takes the flak, which is fine. I've got thick skin. But the realities are that Customs and Border Protection, the Department of Justice, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, various other entities as well, all have important contributions in this space, and including within FDA, even beyond the Center for Tobacco Products. The Office of Regulatory Affairs are the primary entities that work on imports. So needless to say, there's a lot of different entities that have to be involved in taking action. And our primary action at the border is import alerts. We routinely update those. We recently issued those for Elf Bar and others, and we can update the names. But, we're also mindful of the fact that it continues to evolve. And so we have to be mindful of those shifts. And we also have to be mindful as well that there's people that are illegally declaring the products in the shipments. And so we have other activities that we can use to help to address that. So it's on our radar. I will say that we'll have several announcements. We'll continue. We've done import alerts for some time, but other actions to address imports that, again, is the beginning of continued and important collaborations across the full federal sphere. But I want to reinforce enough that it's not just FDA. And I think it's really important that a broader public health community is mindful of that there's a lot of levers to push. But the suggestion that FDA is the sole entity that has authority over our borders is just not consistent with, the realities. But it's certainly something that we're committed to working with partners to make sure we're maximize the impact at the border.
Right. So communication is key, especially you are a partner agency with Customs and Border Patrol under something called CTAC. So you're right. You are not the only one patrolling the borders, but it's the communication. And we hope that there will be more and more of that, because it is so urgent, especially for people whose kids are addicted to these products. I'll let Dorian finish.
Right. I just wanted to wrap up that one question, which is, we remember before you got to FDA during COVID, you had taken many boots off the ground as far as enforcement was concerned, just because, it wasn't right to put enforcers at risk because of the COVID situation. But now that we seem to be through that, do you have the boots on the ground again around the country, patrolling stores and making sure, because, obviously your products that have received the marketing denial orders, the MDOs, should be off the market yesterday. Many of them are not. And then, of course, you have the other ones who haven't submitted. So are the boots on the ground there now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've ramped back up to pre-pandemic levels. And, this is another complexity that we work with the state programs, and we have arrangements with all of the states to do this. Some are directly with the health departments, some are with third parties. And so we routinely engage, and those inspections are happening on a daily basis. One of the complexities is the vast array of the marketplace. And so what we can't do is give a booklet with 26 million products, to the inspectors. And so that's where we've got to prioritize to make sure that we are doing targeted efforts. And so those retailer blitzes that you saw over the summer were a good example of that. Repeated hits for specific products that we know are particularly appealing, such as Elf Bar, because the data shows, that there's impact. And then more recently, you've seen us escalating from there. So we went back and reinvestigated. And if they didn't correct the violation, they were issued civil money penalties. And so we have the infrastructure in place, and we're certainly continuing to have the boots on the ground. But one complexity of this is also that we need people to fill the booths at FDA. And so one elephant in the room is that FDA does not get user fees for e-cigarettes. And so 90% of our enforcement time and dollars are spent on a product that we are not collecting user fees from. And that's something that the US Congress can do. And we estimate that's about $100 million that we're out. And so if we had $100 million, we could put more boots on the ground. We could review applications more, but there's a glaring gap in terms of the resources. We also don't have 21st Century Cures funding that every other center at FDA has, which effectively allows them to pay investigators and others about 15 to 20% more to do their job than the people at Center for Tobacco Products, because tobacco is specifically excluded from the Cures Act. And so we're fighting against competition within FDA, but also broader resource constraints. And so there's certainly a will, but we really need that way to make sure that we do have those assets that are needed to really robustly enforce the law. And we're committed to doing it. We're doing what we can with what we have. We're engaging with the states, but there's a lot of things working against us and not a lot of folks flanking us for support.
Right. So questions are pouring in and we have so many things to say. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I will say one last thing, which is that there is a violation portal on FDA's website. So anyone who's listening, if you do see a violation, if you do see illegal products, you can submit it to FDA. And we've been assured in the past, and I'm sure you will assure us, Brian, that all submissions will be investigated. So if you see anything, if you see something, say something. And now I'm going to turn it over to Meredith, but thank you so much, Brian King, for this amazing Q&A and the presentation. And, you know, honestly, we could have gone on for another hour, but
we definitely could. I really want to thank you. And, you know, maybe this time next year, if Brian, if you're generous enough to join us again, we can have, hopefully, based on what you just said at the end, maybe there'll be a conversation about e-cig tax parity with combustibles or some new policy that will, because it really is a problem. We really appreciate your partnership, your willingness to join us and to engage with stakeholders. We know you care. We know there's a lot more that we need FDA to do and that you want to do, and we hope it'll be soon. So thank you very much again, Brian.
Okay, thanks so much. Appreciate the time and hope to see you all again soon. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Okay, we really do appreciate the partnership of FDA and of Dr. King.